Well, we appreciate your dedication.
Yeah, we'll get Lori set up for it. Actually, here pretty soon we should be in Chambers. Have we figured that out, Greg?
They're
Yet?
working on it as we speak.
Okay.
The city of Akron tonight they're going to vote on a resolution that was presented to unmask the whole city. So I'll see how that goes.
Well, they passed ordinance to require the masks, so they had to legislate it back out.
Right. So they're going to do that. Yeah, tonight I think. At least propose it.
We didn't pass an ordinance, so we don't have to unordinance it.
Right, I know. I was just letting you know about how things are. Well, you already know things are changing rapidly about masks and unmasked. You know.
All right, Mr. President, we are live, and everything
Thank
seems
you.
to be good.
Mr. Greer, you have the invocation tonight, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I got it.
Okay.
Mr. President?
Yes?
Okay, I just wanted to do a sound check, make sure I was on. Thank you.
You're loud and clear.
Thank you.
Okay, it is 6 o'clock, and this is Barberton City Council. Today is Monday, May 24th, 2021. Before we get into our legislative meeting tonight, we are going to have committee meetings. We have 5 committee meetings tonight, and we're going to start off with City Properties, Park, and Recreation with Mr. Hyde.
Thank you, Mr. President. City Properties, Parks, and Recreation meeting today, Monday, May 24th, 2021, 6 p.m. We are all virtual. All members of the committee are present, and council and guests noted. We have a couple late legislation requests. First one is a letter from Director Patterson requesting legislation to apply for a NatureWorks grant program through the Ohio Department of Natural Resources for up to $150,000 for construction of sand volleyball courts at Tuscarora Park. This is a reimbursement grant requiring 25% match. Emergency wording is requested. Director, do you have a few words about this?
I believe he's gone.
He is gone already.
No, I'm back. I'm back.
Okay.
Okay.
Some technical difficulties here.
That's all right.
Okay, I didn't hear where you were at in the meeting.
I'm reading the first grant application to ODNR for up to $150,000 for construction of sand volleyball courts at Tuscarora Park. Reimbursement grant requiring a 25% match. Emergency wording requested due to what I've been told is a June 1st deadline.
Yes, you're correct. I just got that stuff today, actually Friday, from Sam. But we've been working on a project for getting sand volleyball courts over at Tusk. Want to get a total of 4. If funding will let us do it. If not, we can scale back to 2. But we want to put them right up by the closer to where the tennis courts and that open field. The deadline is to send it off is June 1st. We've asked for an extension. She still spoke with ODNR earlier today, and they will do that for us.
Thank you. And the 25% match.
Yes, we are also asking for funding from the foundation. They have a grant that we can apply for here in the fall.
And is that what the second piece is when we get to that?
So the second piece is for other funding, just for regular programs. That's grant is due here June 1st. That's for our smaller programs. We'll reapply in the fall. The grant in the fall is for health and wellness.
Thank you, Director. Are there any questions from the committee about this? Any questions from the body?
Mr. Heidig.
Councilor DeBevick?
Thank you. Just for clarification, just because I don't have, so this piece of legislation is just to give Mr. Patterson permission to make a grant request for the sand volleyball courts. Mr. Patterson, do you have kind of an estimate of what those courts will cost and what our court match will be?
Yes, our we got quotes from Lewis Landscaping. They came in at around $130, but we also need some grading done to the area because it's actually kind of was rink, so it's kind of a little bit lower than regular land level. So that would be the additional 30 for it. And again, the 25% match we're trying to get from the foundation. They have up to $100,000 that we can apply for, which we'll just need to apply for the 25% match.
Okay. That's all I had, Mr. Heidig.
Thank you, Counselor. Anything from anyone else? Well, hearing none, I will have to ask for a motion to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 302, the 10-day rule, Council Rule 304, not on agenda, Council Rule 401, not called for at Committee of the Whole, so that we can meet the deadline here. I will entertain a motion to invoke all that.
I'll make that motion.
I will second that.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So now that that is invoked, can I have a motion to put this on the agenda?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I will second that.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. The second piece of legislation is a letter from Director Patterson requesting legislation to authorize the submission of a grant application to the Barberton Community Foundation in the amount of $15,000 in support of the 2021 Parks and Recreation Department programs. Emergency wording is requested once again because the deadline being June 1st. Director, do you have any words on this piece of legislation?
Yes, that's just for our general programs. We plan on putting out a full slate of programs this year as everything is becoming back to open back up. So, and this is this will go from June this year through June of next year. So it's for 1 year. That's all.
Thank you. Do I have any questions from the committee?
Mrs. Fry had her hand up.
Any from the body? Councilor Fry.
Thank you, Mr. Heidick. I just wanted to note that these two pieces of legislation got on the agenda tonight because of Mrs. Miller, Mrs. Fox, and Lori Reese, because they were late requests and we didn't think that we were going to be able to get the grant requests in, and we didn't think that we were going to be able to apply for these. And after I talked to Lori today, then I made a call to both Lisa and Mrs. Fox, and they researched it and got these put on our agenda for tonight. And I truly appreciate it because I think it's a great idea for Tusk Park, and I think it'll be good for the city. And I just wanted to thank them publicly because they had to scramble to get this on our agenda for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Anything from anyone else? Director Miller, I see you just popped in there.
Oh, I just wanted to say it's Lori and Renee. They did a great job.
Well, we definitely appreciate this. Well, hearing no more questions, Director Miller, since I invoked the council rules earlier, the 702, do I have to do it again for this piece?
Was the motion including both of them or just one? Who made the motion?
Councilor Coburn made the motion. Shall I do it again just to be sure?
Yeah, I didn't hear if the motion included both or just one.
That is not a problem.
Okay.
That being the case, can I get a motion to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 302, the 10-day rule, Council Rule 304, not on the agenda, and Council Rule 401, not called for at Committee of the Whole?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I will second that.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
With the suspension there, do I have a motion to call for this grant request?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I will second that.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 And these two will be added to the agenda tonight. That is all there for miscellaneous discussion. I do have just one quick one for Director Patterson. I am getting some complaints that the chains and the nets on Abbey Webb Park are starting to come unraveled there. If we have an extra set, if we could change those out.
Yeah, I'll get right on top of it. I'm actually in the process of getting those chain nets down and getting some regular nets up. The things are dated and can be a safety hazard. But I will get on top of web for you.
Thank you. And does anybody else from the body have anything for miscellaneous discussion? Hearing and
Mr.
seeing.
Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick? Any new updates on the skate park yet?
Mr. Mayor, Director Tracy, do you have any, and Director Hunt, do you have anything for updates for that?
No, as we mentioned previously, still going through the process with the EPA and with the American Rescue Plan and everything else we have going on. That kind of stuff, since it's time sensitive, is taking precedent.
Thank you, Mayor. Anything else from anyone? Hearing and seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
I will second that, sir.
Thank you both. We are adjourned at 6:11.
Thank you very much. Next committee meeting is Public Welfare and Safety with Mrs. DeBevitt.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to bring to order the Public Welfare and Safety Committee meeting It's Monday, May 24th, 2021. It is 6:12 p.m. We are virtual via GoToMeeting. All members of the committee are present, as well as all council members and all others noted. We have one new request for legislation, which will be referred to finance. It is a letter from Chief Pursley requesting legislation appropriating the $910, which was a grant from the Barberton Community Foundation for the unappropriated Fire Prevention Education Fund to the operating and maintenance of the Fire Prevention Education Fund for the purchase of smoke detectors for Barberton residents. And if we recall, they had a grant for a portion of the cost of these smoke detectors, as well as the union was donating towards them, and then we gave them permission to apply for a grant. So I'm guessing, Chief Pursley, if you're on here, that this is the money that you received from the foundation.
No, that is correct.
Does anyone have any questions about this piece of legislation? Hearing none, do I have a motion to call for this?
I'll make a motion to call for this.
Motion made by Mr. Greer. Do I have a second?
A second.
Second by Mr. Griffin. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And this passes unanimously. We do have one piece of legislation this evening that we will be voting on, and it is ordinance number 48, 2021. And it is, you can bear with me for a second. I have too many papers on the go here. It is an appropriation from the fire department for $3,500 from the unappropriated item of the general fund to the fire department operating budget. And as we recall, this was a result of the fire department receiving a $1,000 donation from Woodman Life Insurance to be used toward firefighter PPE. And also the Barberton Fire Department received a $2,500 safety intervention grant from Bureau of Workers' Compensation, which totals the $3,500, which was going to be used on, I believe, particulate hoods. Does anyone have any questions about this piece of legislation? No? Does anyone have any miscellaneous discussion for safety this evening? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Motion made by Mr. Griffin, second by Mr. Greer. I'm sorry, yes, Mr. Greer. All in favor? Aye.
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 And we adjourn at 6:15. Thank you.
And thank you. Next up is Mr. Griffin and Rules, Marketing, and Development.
Thank you, Mr. President. Rules, Marketing, and Development. I would like to call this meeting to order today, May 24th. We are meeting virtual. All members are present and all others as noted. We have no requests for legislation for tonight, but we do have pending legislation, ordinance number 43-2021, CDBG Annual Action Plan. Does anyone have any remarks or discussion for this ordinance or anything for rules of marketing?
Chairman?
Yes, sir. Mr. Heidi?
Thank you, Chairman. Did everybody receive the updated amendment to the CBDG budget?
I did, yes.
Thank you.
No question about it?
I just wanted to make sure that everybody had a copy of it.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Do we have anything else for safety for this evening? Hearing none,
Rules, not safety.
for rules, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Griffin,
Yes, ma'am.
this is Mrs. DeBevick.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Are we voting on this piece of legislation this evening?
No, it's second reading tonight.
Okay.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes, Nina.
No, Lori.
I mean, Laura.
I was told by Mrs. Miller that we can go for just 2 readings and vote on it tonight. They added emergency wording.
Okay.
And to add to the matter, I know that there was this amendment that was put forth. So our public hearings will end June 16th is our last public hearing. So if council feels like the third, I'm comfortable with it going 3 readings. If we want to take it to either the 14th or either the 21st with a special legislative meeting or the 28th of June.
So what happened is Trevor had just communicated recently because he just got word recently that there was an adjustment made to the allocation. Is that correct? Did I say that correctly?
Yep.
Yeah. So that happened very recently. And so, Laura, you were correct when I said we could do that, but this adjustment just happened. I believe, I think I got that email maybe today's Monday, maybe Friday or today. So, Laura, you are correct, and I did say that, but then this adjustment happened. So we could have went 2 readings and done that, but this adjustment happened, and now they need to have some public hearing and so forth, and do the proper notices, and they're taking care of that right now, and he's got that part handled, and he's published it and noticed those things properly, and so I think we're just going to carry it to a 3rd reading, right, Trevor, so that all those things just fall into place. And by the 3rd reading, everything will have happened, and we could just kind of seamlessly go forward. So the 3rd reading is going to happen, not because it actually needed to in the first place, but because of these intervening things that occurred. I hope that makes sense.
That's correct, yeah.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller.
And we're comfortable either the 21st or the 28th, whatever council's comfortable with there. So.
Do we have any more remarks? Well, hearing none, we'll make a motion do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Heidick. I need a second.
I'll second that.
Mr. Jaber. We're adjourned at 6:21.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Mrs. Coburn and City Utilities.
Good evening. This is Monday, May 24th. I'd like to call City Utilities to order. All members are present, along with others noted. We have a request for legislation, a letter from the Utilities Director requesting legislation to authorize the Director of Finance to place a lien with the Summit County Auditor for unpaid utility services. This will include accounts more than 60 days past due and will include billing through August 20th, 2021. We are asking for emergency wording, although we can do 3 readings on this, but we have to have the emergency wording so that at the end of those 3 readings, this can be signed and we can get to Summit County to place it on the bills. This is with people greater than $500. They're working with other people that have less. And so this is Mr. Weaver, if you have anything to add, I'd appreciate it. If not, that's where it is.
I think you've covered it pretty well. That's exactly what we intend to do. There could be some system development charges on this from some sewer connections, and those are $1,600 a piece. We have a few of those that remain unpaid, so I plan on adding those to the assessment.
And this is something we do every year, correct?
Yes, most every year. I've been doing it for the last 5 years, and it's been done periodically before that.
Okay,
in the past year, we've really got behind. We had a peak of 534,900 last August in our delinquencies. We're currently at 471,900, so they're pretty high. These are the highest levels I've ever seen.
Are there any other questions from the committee? I don't see anything from Carla or Carol. With that, is there any from the floor? Okay, do I have a motion to call for this? Carol Fry? Okay, I'll second, and Carla will second it. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Now for the list. We do have emergency wording for these pending legislations that we'll be voting on tonight. This is ordinance number 52, 2021, enter into contract with Henderson Products Incorporated. This is for the truck. Do we have any remarks on that? Hearing none, the next one is ordinance 53, 2021. This is to enter into contract with Hisson Kenworth for another portion of the truck. This will replace a truck that we have that will be going to the street department for their use. Do I have any remarks? Okay. Ordinance number 54, 2021 is appropriation stormwater department for 15th Street Northwest. This is also got emergency wording. This is to move forward on closing on a house on 15th Street. Ordinance 56, 2021, the purchase.
Mrs.
Wait a minute,
Cope.
that's not right. That's Arthur Street. I'm sorry. The first one was Arthur Street. 55, 2021 was for stormwater department for Arthur Street. I misread.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Can we go back to 54, 2021? You mentioned that was for closing on a house on 15th Street. I thought that.
Yeah, I misread it.
Okay.
It's my.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I. Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
That is for appropriating the grant money for them to move forward with 15th Street.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
And then the next one is appropriating the amount for Arthur Street. That's number 55. Number 56 is to do the property on 114 14th Street Northwest. They'll be purchasing that and closing is June. I'm not sure. I don't have that in front of me. Resolution 57, 2021 is an application for OPWC grant for Taylor Road water main replacement project. The resolution 58, 2021 is titled OPWC grant application for the Wolf Creek Dam rehabilitation project.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Can I just get some clarification? So last time utilities met, I'm sorry, I'm flipping through my notes. We discussed whether or not the OPWC were grants or loans.
These are all grants.
Okay, whatever is not what our match is that how it becomes a loan? Because I looked in the budget book for 2021, and on page 30, the intergovernmental loans, OPWC loans, are listed there. And I was just wondering how it rolls into a loan then, if it's a grant.
We have to apply specifically for a loan. The grants do not roll into loans. We would come back for other legislation that allowed us to apply for a loan.
Okay, so this is just strictly for a grant. So then I guess my question is this. If we would get the OPWC grant and we needed another 2,000 before we would move forward, that comes back to City Council.
Correct.
Is that what you're telling me? Okay.
They're putting in multiple applications for grants over different areas that would apply for this. And if they do have to do a loan, that will come back to us for us to do an ordinance for a loan.
Okay, because Mr. Tracy, I thought indicated last week that it was all loans, and I knew that in our budget we definitely had OPWC, or I'm sorry, Mr. Tracy indicated grants. I apologize. And I do know in our budget we have OPWC loans. So correct. I just need to clarify what we were doing.
But the grants do not roll over into loans.
Okay.
Correct, Mr. Tracy?
Correct. So yeah, both of these pieces of legislation are for grant applications specifically, nothing to do with loans. What we're trying to do here is for the dam one, that will likely be coupled with other funding. So we applied for the brick funding a couple months ago. We should hear about that hopefully in June. And then between the brick funding and OPWC, we'll see how much is left over, what the city has to match out of those two grant funds. And then at that point, hopefully we can see if it's worth taking a loan out for part of the match or all of the match, or if we can use ARPA money or infrastructure money at that point. Those are kind of things that we have to get the grant amounts first and then figure out what we're going to do after that. Those total amounts are totaled up.
Yes, Mrs.
I did listen to 2 of the webinars provided by the National League of Cities and the Ohio Municipal League regarding the ARPA. And it was very clear, I just want all of council to know, it was very clear that if you are receiving other government funding for a project, your match can absolutely not come from the American Rescue Plan Act. So I just wanted to clarify that. That's the message that I took away from both of those webinars.
Yes, Mr. Tracy.
She is correct. That's for a federal government match, to my understanding. So we could still accept an OPWC state grant and then use ARPA funds in addition to the OPWC grant. But we couldn't use BRIC grant funding and the ARPA funding is the way I understand it right now. There's still more to be figured out with all the ARPA funding and stuff, but that's kind of the general consensus at this point.
Okay. Thank you. So that was number 58, correct? For the dam. Okay. Ordinance number 59, 2021 is to enter into a cooperative agreement with the city of Norton and the city of Barberton. We had to do this so that we could apply for the grants. The next one, ordinance number 60, 2021, is to enter into a cooperative agreement with the county of Summit and the city of Barberton. This also was required for us to apply for the grant. Both of those give us more points when we apply for grants because we're working with other communities to achieve a goal. Is there any miscellaneous discussion? Mrs.
I just want, I'm sorry, I'm confused. I apologize. So the piece of legislation where we enter into contract with Norton, is that for what project? For
the application for the grant funding for both, one is for the, wait, I better let Mr. Tracy or Mr. Weaver explain that. I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Okay, so there's two separate resolutions, and one is an agreement with the county and one is an agreement with Norton. So the one with the county is specifically for they're giving the city of Barberton $150,000 for the dam because they have downstream infrastructure that could be affected by a dam failure. And then we will in turn give them $150,000 to upgrade some of their pump stations in the downstream area of the dam. So, you know, it's a wash as far as money exchanged, and in turn you get the chance for better points at a bigger grant. And then the city of Norton is going in on the Taylor Road water main and also the dam, so 50 for each of those. So in return, we are giving them 50 for their Carl Reimer Road water main extension and the Eastern Road resurfacing project. So it's 100 both ways.
100,000. I'm sorry.
So it's 50 for each project from each community. So Barberton will be giving Norton $100,000, and then Norton would give Barberton $100,000 and towards their projects in lieu to get better scoring on the grant funding.
Okay.
In other words, it's all on paper.
True.
Is there any other questions? And hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Fry, and seconded by Carla. We are adjourned at 6:34.
Okay, last but not least is Finance and Personnel, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to bring the Finance and Personnel Committee meeting to order. It is Monday, May the 24th, 2021. It is 6:35, and we are meeting virtually on GoToMeeting. All members of the committee are present, as well as all council members and city officials and guests, as noted on my agenda sheet. The topics of discussion for this evening are, first, that we received a legislative request from Safety, which is a letter from Chief Persley requesting legislation appropriating the $910, which was a grant from the Barberton Community Foundation, from the Unappropriated Fire Prevention Education Fund to the operating and maintenance of the Fire Prevention Education Fund for the purchase of smoke detectors for Barberton residents. This was explained in Mrs. DeBevick's safety meeting, and it was referred to finance for the appropriation. Does anyone have any questions regarding this request? No? Hearing none, do I have a motion to call for this?
I'll make that
I can't
motion.
see everyone's hands, so please keep that in mind. If you want to talk, please speak up. Okay, motion made by Mr. Medges.
I'll second it.
Second by Mrs. DeBevick. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, it passes unanimously. Second request that we got was a letter from Elizabeth Doherty, our safety director, requesting legislation to amend ordinance number 37, 2021, increasing wages for seasonal employees. And Mrs. Doherty is requesting emergency wording. The letter states that Mrs. Doherty had recently requested legislation to amend ordinance number 129, 2019 due to the increase in the minimum wage in Ohio. This ordinance passed on 26, 2021, and the ordinance number is 37-2021. Our current advertising for seasonal employees has yielded a record low number of applicants. It is widely felt that the starting wage of $8.80 is woefully low compared to other entry-level jobs. Many fast food restaurants are committing to a starting wage of $15 per hour or more. Municipal advertising for seasonal employment ranges anywhere from $11 up to $17. Mrs. Doherty had asked Lori Reese-Price to research the last time our crossing guards, jailers, and reserve police officers received an increase in hourly wages. Her research indicated the last increase was at least 9 years ago. I am prepared to support my reasoning for the new wage table at the next Finance Committee meeting. Due to the city's immediate need for seasonal employees and a long overdue need to increase our hourly wages for positions outlined in ordinance number 37, 2021, I am requesting emergency language with one reading if possible. Please find the new wage table enclosed with her request, and I do have a copy of the different positions and what they are going to change them to. Does anyone have any questions regarding this request? And remember, I cannot see everyone. So if you want, Mr. Greer?
Mrs. Fry, thank you, Chair. I know I'm not in your committee, but I was wondering what type of increase. I wrote the mayor in favor of increase, but just kind of looking at what type of increase are we looking at in that sheet. I don't have that table.
Well, I read the letter and it said that the starting wage was $8.80,
mm-hmm.
and that was with the increase for the minimum wage, and the range is going to go from $11 up to $17. And what the criteria for deciding what that rate will be based on whether or not they have worked for the city previously or if, they are just starting their first year here. So that is the range.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone else have any questions?
Mrs. Fry?
Comments? Yes, Mrs. Bevick.
Yes. I don't see anyone going up to $17, just for clarification, except the jailer and then the reserve officer. I guess what's missing for me is where we went from, like, what the chart that we're looking at, is this what they made? I guess, what did they make? What is the increase? Because this just has what's proposed, but
Mrs. Fry?
Yes, Mrs. Doherty, go ahead. You can answer this.
A letter, Mrs. DeBevick?
I do have the letter, yes. I'm just trying to read it.
If you look at the, I guess it would be the second page of the letter where it's got all the ranges from previously. Yeah. That's what it was before. And what it is now, for if you're just strictly talking laborers, is $13 with a 25-cent increase up to $14. These other positions, the reserve officer, the crossing guards, the jailer, and lead crossing guard, those are separate and come out of public safety. They're not laborers, they're part-time. And crossing guards, and you can still see the difference between what they were paid before and what they're being paid now.
I don't see the difference. I don't know if that's okay. I apologize. I went one page too far. My question's answered.
Okay. So and what we also had to be mindful of for not going higher than the 25 cents for clerk and laborers is that we didn't want to encroach upon the entry level wages, hourly wage for AFSCME clerk and laborer. Do you understand what that means? I didn't want to have our seasonal people making as much or nearly as much as our entry level full-time employees. And then also when we talk about a crossing guard and a lead crossing guard, those are paid out of the schools we pay, and then the schools reimburse us. And I also forwarded an email from Chief Morber today that I received today to Lori and Renee and Lisa and Mrs. Miller, asking to add one more position, which is the juvenile diversion position, for an increase in wages for that position. Again, it's coming out of the budget that we already have due to an increase that was received from the schools last year. So it is within the chief's budget to do that increase as well.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Doherty.
You're welcome.
Did that answer your question, Mrs. Sabevic?
Yes, thank you. I turned too many pages. I apologize.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Heidick's had his hand up.
Okay, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Chair. This question would be more towards Director Doherty, Director Fletcher, and Mayor. When you talk about encroaching on the entry level for AFSCME, how close are we to that threshold where we would be kind of chasing our own tails with seasonals versus full-time employees? And I know there's roll-up costs involved and all that, but I didn't know if there was kind of a breakdown of that.
There is. If you want to stand by, I can get to it. I believe it's 92 cents.
The difference would be roughly 92 cents?
From the highest paid laborer to the lowest paid laborer or entry level laborer. I believe that's true, yes. I'm going to look right now, though.
Thank you. Then while you're looking, my other question would be, if that be the case at 92 cents, would it make sense to just hire that person in at full time with 92 cents?
No, actually, I'm sorry. It is not 92 cents. This is the January. I'm looking at the January 1, 2021 wage table, and I apologize. No, it's $3.07 difference.
Oh, thank you. That makes a little more sense.
Yes.
Less than $1 would really make me question that, but
no, it's $3.07 difference. It's the laborers in 2021 start out at $17.07.
Thank you much. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Heidick. Mrs. Angeloff, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Mrs. Doherty, can you tell me the range to how many of, I know we didn't have any seasonals last year, but how many from 2019 are coming back?
I cannot answer that. We still haven't hired a full slate of seasonals. I know we do have some repeats, but if you look at the scale from the letter, let me get back to that. If you look at that, for instance, park leaders 1, 2, maintenance worker, specialists 1 and 2, we're not going to have multiples of those.
Okay.
In other words, by far we would have more laborers than we would have park leaders and program instructors, supervisors. So yes, it will be an increase to the budget in parks and recreation, but it wouldn't be, the numbers are going to be they're going to be a lot different.
Okay.
How many per? Now we're still struggling to get seasonals, which is why we would like to have this increase, so we can put out a new ad. We'd like to get that out soon so that we can try to get some seasonals. I'm sure everyone is aware of the issues that are happening, at least in Ohio. Going to closing a few days a week and actually going to $20 an hour. They're closing because they can't get help. So they've changed their rate of pay to $20 an hour just to get the help that they need to bring in the clients. The people that come to the park.
Yeah. The private sector is really killing us here. I saw somebody had a $500 bonus and started you out at $13. So yeah, hopefully you can get the high school kids and college kids to come back. Not having it in a year, that kind of hurt because they got other employment. But I wish you good luck on that, Beth, on getting some help.
Well, it's just tough all the way around, I think, for local governments. And, the $13 an hour to start for laborers is roughly $4.20 more than what we would.
More than.
So, I mean, although that's a big jump for us here at Barberton, when you're talking $20 to go work at Cedar Point or, McDonald's down the street, I think their starting wage, depending on experience, is $13 also. But it's
okay.
And I've read where I think Chipotle's going to $15 an hour. I don't know if that's accurate as of this moment, but that's what I've heard in the recent news. So
yeah, it's very difficult out there. Yes, very enticing. Great job, thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anyone else have any comments?
Mr. Heidick has
or question. Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Chair. I have one last question for Director Doherty there. What is the minimum age for seasonals?
18. You have to be 18. And we do require a valid Ohio driver's license as well.
Is there any sort of scale where we can use younger workers?
I believe it's the city's policy that we employ 18 and older.
That's what I mean. Is that something that we could legislate to go to 16 and 17, or is that not adopted?
No, well, we could. That would be a Lisa Miller question. I believe it's not advisable due to, they can't do anything more than what the 18-year-olds can do. And in fact, they might have to do less. And we need permission from parents. And I think, I don't know how or if it would affect our insurance, but it may. I don't know those answers.
Councilman Height?
Yes, Mayor.
We have worked over since I've been mayor, with Summit County's Job and Family Services that has a pretty good program geared for lower age or younger age kids, high school age, under 18. And I believe a few that were over 18. So they come in, they've got some job responsibilities, but all the oversight and management is done by Summit County Job and Family Services. I'm not sure if they have that program this year. I have not heard anything yet, but that's typically where to try to get Barberton kids or kids from that particular community to stay and work in that community. So that's one option.
Mr. Mayor, I do know that they have restarted that program, as the restaurant that I manage has taken advantage of that, and they will be sending workers. I just didn't know if the 16 and 17-year-old option was viable, and it sounds like it may not be, given the job descriptions and the oversight and supervision that would follow with it. But I appreciate both of your answers. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Heidick. Anyone else? Okay, do I have a motion to call for this piece of legislation? Mrs. Angela? And remember, I can't see hands. Anyone else? Second it, Carla? Okay, yeah. Seconded by Mrs. DeBevick. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you. Okay, now we're to our pending legislation. We have resolution number 45/2021 titled the PRO-ACT support. And this was going to go 3 readings, but do you want to pass it in 2? How do people feel about that? Mrs. Angela?
Yes, I think 2 readings so we can get this down to our senators and whatnot. I think we should go ahead and vote on that tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? We have discussed it, and we even had a call in, and I think that however people are going to vote has been decided. So if everyone is agreeable to this, I think we should vote on it tonight.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes, Mrs. DeBevick.
I'm indifferent as to whether we vote for it tonight or go 3 readings, but I think that I'm just going to make a suggestion that you poll the other council members and maybe not on our committee and see where they think for it to someone not for the suspension of the rules not to pass. So I would just make that suggestion before we make that decision.
Well, how does the rest of the body feel about that? Or do they still want to think about it longer, or Mrs. Coburn?
I'm okay with voting on it tonight.
Okay.
Again, Mr.
Anyone
Heidick,
else?
and Mr. Heidick.
Okay, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Chair. I'm comfortable with voting tonight.
Okay. How about Mr. Griffin?
It's okay with me, Mrs. Fry.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Mr. Greer?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. I think I got everybody. If I forgot anybody, please speak up. Okay. So I think we will vote on that tonight. The next piece of pending legislation is ordinance number 46-2021. And this is to authorize payment to Everbridge Incorporated Utilities. This is the piece of legislation that was regarding Nixle, and the amount of the invoice is $5,400.91. The only reason it's coming through council is because the invoice came before we had a PO. So I had given the comments from Chief Morber last week, and we'll be voting on that this evening. The next piece of legislation is ordinance number 47-2021. This is amending ordinance number 54-2019, compensation for elected officials. I believe that this is the first reading for this piece of legislation. I think it's going to go 3 because I believe, and Mr. Heidick can verify this, we have until June 28th.
Correct.
Okay, so it's a first reading for that tonight. The next piece of legislation is ordinance number 48-2021, and this is an appropriation for the fire department. This appropriation is for the protective hoods, which is a form of PPE, and it protects our firefighters from carcinogens, and that will be on the agenda for this evening. The next piece of legislation is ordinance number 59-2021, and this is to enter into a cooperative agreement with the City of Norton and City of Barberton regarding the utilities, and this was in Joyce's committee, and it was referred to Finance. The next ordinance is ordinance number 60-2021. This is titled Enter into Cooperative Agreement, County of Summit and City of Barberton. And this is referred to us from utilities as well, and it was discussed in Mrs. Coburn's committee. Now for miscellaneous discussion. Last week, I prepared a report of sorts regarding the ARP about the last meeting that we had. And I think I only got one comment. I don't think anyone else sent anything or commented on the notes, but we are going to meet again this Wednesday, and I will follow that up with a report after that that meeting and after I prepare notes. Does anyone have any questions, or does anyone have any miscellaneous discussion about anything? Mrs. Coburn?
That was a very good report. Thank you. I appreciate your time and effort.
Well, thank you, Mrs. Coburn. Anyone else?
Mr. Heidick has his hand up again.
Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Chairwoman. You need to figure out how to put my square in there.
Yeah, I know. I'll tell you who I only have. Justin, Joyce, Craig, and Nina. That's all that I have on my screen. So anybody else that needs to speak, please just say, may I speak?
Well, thank you. And that was a very detailed report, and I do appreciate that. And I did send that email. I do think that pursuing the community center that retired Officer Cheatham is hoping to build would be hopefully fall within the parameters and be a viable project to help fund there. Thank you.
Yes, I thought that was a great idea. And as you said, if it fits within the parameters. And I did want to note this too, in that particular report, a comment that Mrs. Demevic made this evening, I did cover that. I said that you could not go out for federal grant money if you were using ARP money for a project. I do believe you can go out for state money, but anyway, I wanted to point that out as well. Does anybody else have any comments, or Mrs. Angeloff?
Thank you, Chair. I read that report that you had sent out on the ARP, and it was very detailed. You're a good recording secretary, and it answered all, any question anybody had, anything. It was very detailed, and I appreciate it. I know it took a lot of time to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes, Mrs. Debevic.
I would also like to thank you for your details. And I'm going to divert this question to Mr. Flaker,
Okay.
if he's available. I did have the opportunity to attend both of the webinars, as I said, on Thursday, May 20th. And I'm just wondering how the revenue lost. So what I took away was the revenue lost option provides the most flexibility for communities like ours to be able to do things that maybe don't fall under the parameters. Have you explored the equation that they've given, Mr. Flaker, for that?
Yeah, I've looked at it to see what that equation consists of and what revenues can be and can't be included in that formula.
Okay. Do you think that that's something that we stand to benefit from?
Yeah, just for the main fact how the wording is when it comes to calculating the revenue. There is, in one of the sections, when it's talking about what can be included for taxes, it's going to take a look at our 2019 number. And if we all remember, 2019 was the last full year of B&W. It was actually the final year of B&W here in the city. And that loss, according to their guidance, can be included in that revenue loss calculation. So yeah, there is the revenue loss that we can use for income tax for sure.
That was my next question, is that I from what I understood, it would constitute 2019 and 2020 and 2021. So I knew that we still had B&W's income in 2019, and it seemed that it would be included.
Yeah, what I would have to do is in that they use a 4.1% growth rate. So I would have to take a look at actually, you use the 2019 actuals as your base, but I also would then have to look at, I want to say 3 years prior. So I think it's 16, 17, and 18 I have to look at, and look at those actuals and see what and calculate our growth rate, because the 4.1 is just the base percentage. If we see that our growth rate is actually higher than 4.1%, and we can prove that it was over 4.1% for those preceding years, we can use the higher growth rate. But for the most part, our income tax remains stagnant, so we more than likely will just use the 4.1%.
Okay. And then, I don't know, in my opinion, and I just kind of want your opinion on this, the two webinars that I listened to gave contradictory information about using the money for public safety payroll.
Yeah, because a lot of it has to deal with the wording. I mentioned it last week when I was talking to council. The difference between CARES Act and the ARPA money, you have the CARES Act where they said substantially dedicated. This ARP money, they put it as primarily dedicated, and they go a step further in the wording and also state about they have to be a dedicated part of a dedicated group or unit division for mitigating COVID. So it's very, very vague. Well, not vague, but it seems very restrictive right now for wages. A lot of people are saying they want this ARP to be more proactive, like to help the economy more, than reactive, kind of like the CARES Act was. So still seeking more clarification on that. They have, I want to say it was a 60-day comment period. So while, yes, they issued the guidance, we have to remember, like the CARES Act, the guidance, the final guidance and tweaking is still not done. So that could change in the coming months even.
Did we receive our first allocation?
Yes, we received that on Friday.
Okay. That's all I have, Mrs. Fry. I wanted to ask those questions. The revenue lost was something that drew my attention in the webinars.
Unmute, Carol.
Thank you. I wanted to make a comment. Thank you, Mrs. Zebevic. By the way, I said that when I was muted. I wanted to make a comment about something that I did not include in the report and realized it after the fact because my notes were all over the place. I had to organize what I was going to say. But and please, Jeremy and Mr. Mayor, jump in if I'm saying this wrong. But originally, it was said that this funding has to be used by December 31st of 2024. In the last meeting that we had, it was mentioned that your projects have to be identified by December 31st of 2024. However, the money does not have to be used until 2026. Is that incorrect, or is that, am I?
That's somewhat correct.
Okay.
So by the end of 24, the money has to be, and they use the word obligated. So basically encumbered. And then the money has to be spent out of the account by the end of 26.
Okay. Okay. Okay, thank you for clarifying. Okay, does anyone else have any questions or comments about the ARP or anything else that has to do with finance? Hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn? Mrs. Angeloff. Motion made by Mrs. Angeloff and seconded by Mrs.
I'll second it.
All right, did you, I'll put Craig down, Carla, because you were muffled and then he wants to get on my sheet. Okay, and we are adjourned at 7:05. Thank you.
We'll start our meeting here in 1 minute. Let me get organized here. Okay, is everybody ready? Okay, here we go. This is a regular legislative meeting of the Barberton City Council. Today is Monday, May 24th, 2021. The time is 7:07 p.m. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, followed by the invocation by Mr. Greer. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let us pray. Dear God, please look over our community as we continue to push forward. I ask that you provide the guidance and courage that our businesses need to survive. Let us remain open to different opinions, but stern in our beliefs. Help us work together, because together is the only way forward. Continue to bless us with the light at the end of the tunnel so that we stay inspired to be better. Please, God, lay a hand on our first responders, frontline workers, and our men and women in the military. As we lay our worries to rest after losing the fight to demons at home, let us never forget the 22.
Clerk, please call the roll.
Mrs. Angeloff.
Here.
Mrs. Coburn.
Here.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Here.
Mrs. Fry.
Here.
Mr. Greer.
Present.
Mr. Griffin.
Here.
Mr. Heidick.
Here.
And Mr. Jaber.
Here.
Okay, Council Rule 103 states the regular and committee of the whole meetings shall be at 7:30 p.m. Since we are starting at 7:09 p.m., we need to invoke Council Rule 702. Do I have a motion for this, Mrs. DeBevick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that we invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 103.
Thank you. And Mr. Heidick?
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion to invoke 702.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. DeBevick and second by Mr. Heidick to invoke Council Rule 702 to suspend Council Rule 103. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting. Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion for the approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, May 10th, 2021, as presented.
Thank you. And Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the approval of the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, May 10th, 2021.
Thank you. It was moved by Mrs. DeBevick and second by Mr. Heidick to approve the minutes of the regular legislative meeting held on Monday, May 10th, 2021, as presented. Are there any remarks? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? The minutes are adopted. Petitions and claims.
We have none.
Matters requested.
They've all been sent email.
Thank you. Citizens addressing council.
We have none tonight.
Thank you. And first reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Ordinance 46, 2021. Presented by Mrs. Fry. Title, Authorized Payment, Utilities Everbridge Incorporated. An ordinance authorizing the Director of Finance to pay an invoice to Everbridge Incorporated for the annual Nixle contract in the amount of $5,400.91 and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry, second by Mrs. DeBevick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yeah.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 46-2021.
Thank you. And Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before I second that, was that referred from utilities, and was I supposed to be the second, and does it matter?
I think it simply came to me, I think. Or was it referred from utilities? I don't think it was.
Okay.
It went straight from finance, originated going straight to Mrs. Fry.
Okay, thank you. Then in that case, I will second Mrs. Fry's motion.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Fry, second by Mrs. DeBevick to adopt ordinance number 46-2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
And Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Ordinance number 47-2021, presented by Mrs. Fry. Title, amending ordinance, 54-2019, compensation for elected officials, and ordinance amending the ordinance number 54-2019 to establish the compensation for certain elected officials and compensation procedures for the next 4 years and declaring an emergency. Ordinance number 48-2021, presented by Mrs. Fry and Mrs. DeBevick. Title, Appropriation, Fire Department. An ordinance appropriating $3,500 from the unappropriated item of the general fund to the fire department operating budget and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeBevick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
and Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that ordinance number 48-2021 be adopted.
Thank you. And Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
A motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeBevick to adopt ordinance number 48-2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
and Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Ordinance number 49-2021, presented by Mr. Greer. Title, Application for Federal Resurfacing Funds, Norton Avenue and 4th Street Resurfacing Improvement Projects. A resolution allowing the mayor to apply for federal resurfacing funds programmed by the Akron Metropolitan Area Transportation Study, AMATS, to improve Norton Avenue and 4th Street and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule is required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mrs. Angela. You're on mute.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. President. I will second that motion to suspend.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Greer and second by Mrs. Angeloff to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of resolution number 49-2021.
Thank you. And Mrs. Angeloff.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second that motion to adopt.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Greer, second by Mrs. Angela to adopt ordinance number 49-2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Angeloff,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Ordinance number 50-2021, presented by Mr. Greer. Title, Enter into Contract, Perrin Asphalt and Concrete, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into contract with Perrin Asphalt and Concrete, the lowest and/or best bidder for the asphalt paving portion of the 2021 street resurfacing program, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you. Motion to suspend, Mr. Greer. Excuse me, Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule is required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second that motion for suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Greer and second by Mrs. Angela to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. DeBevick?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 50-2021.
Thank you. And Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second that motion for adoption.
A motion was made by Mr. Greer and second by Mrs. Angela to adopt ordinance number 50-2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick?
Yes.
Ordinance 51-2021 presented by Mr. Greer. Title, Enter into Contract Specialized Construction Incorporated. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Specialized Construction Incorporated for the chip and seal portion of the 2021 street resurfacing program and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule is required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion for suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Greer and second by Mrs. Angela to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angeloff?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 51-2021.
Thank you. And Mrs. Angela.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second the motion for adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Greer, second by Mrs. Angela to adopt ordinance number 51-2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick?
Yes.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
Yes.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mrs. Angela?
Yes.
Ordinance number 52-2021 presented by Mrs. Coburn. Title, Enter into Contract, Henderson Products Incorporated. An ordinance authorizing the city of Barberton to enter into contract with Henderson Products Incorporated in the amount of $41,604 for the purchase, manufacturing, and installation of a body package and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to suspend.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and second by Mrs. Fry to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff,
Yes.
Mr. Heidig,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Motion to adopt. Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 52, 2021.
Thank you, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to adopt.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and second by Mrs. Fry to adopt ordinance number 52, 2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Heidig,
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Ordinance number 53-2021, presented by Mrs. Coburn. Title, Enter into Contract, Hisson Kenworth, an ordinance authorizing the city of Barberton to enter into contract with Hisson Kenworth of Richfield in the amount of $73,686 for the purchase of a new 2022 Kenworth T270 dump truck, cab, and chassis, and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend. Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to suspend.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and second by Mrs. Fry to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Heidig,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Motion to adopt. Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 53, 2021.
Thank you. Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of, I second Mrs. Coburn's motion for the adoption of ordinance number 53-2021.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and second by Mrs. Fry to adopt ordinance number 53, 2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mr. Heidig,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Coburn.
Yes.
Ordinance 54-2020 and Mrs. Coburn. Title, Appropriation, Stormwater Department, 15th Street Northwest. An ordinance appropriating, okay, here we go. $11,404,135 from the unappropriated item of the FEMA fund to the stormwater capital budget of the FEMA fund and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
That number is incorrect.
It's 1 million, not 11 million.
Okay.
It's $1,104,135. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Lori.
Item, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion for suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry, second by Mrs. Coburn to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff.
Yes.
Mr. Heidig.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 54-2021.
Thank you. And Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion for adoption.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Fry, second by Mrs. Coburn to adopt ordinance number 54-2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mr. Heidig.
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Ordinance 55-2021 presented by Mrs. Fry and Mrs. Coburn. Title, Appropriation Stormwater Department, Arthur Street. An ordinance appropriating, let me make sure I get this one, $141,773 from the unappropriated item of the FEMA fund to the stormwater capital budget of the FEMA fund and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second that motion for suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. Coburn to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Coburn.
Yes.
Mr. Heidig.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 55-2021.
Thank you. And Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second the motion for adoption.
Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. Coe to adopt ordinance number 55, 2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Ordinance number 56-2021, presented by Mrs. Coburn. Title, Purchase of Property, 114 14th Street Northwest. An ordinance authorizing the mayor or his designee to execute an agreement to purchase the property at 114 14th Street Northwest under the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program in the amount of $57,500 and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to suspend.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and second by Mrs. Fry to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick, Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes. I'm sorry, I got kicked off.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber, Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of resolution number, I'm still on here.
56.
56. Ordinance number 56, 2021.
Thank you. And Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to adopt ordinance number 56-2021.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and second by Mrs. Fry to adopt ordinance number 56, 2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Resolution number 57-2021 presented by Mrs. Coburn. Title, OPWC Grant Application, Taylor Road Water Main Replacement Project. A resolution authorizing the mayor to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Ohio Public Works Commission State Capital Improvement and/or local transportation improvement programs to execute contracts as required and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mr. President. You're muted, but thank you.
Sorry about that. Motion to suspend, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the suspension. I move that the rules as required by the section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to suspend.
A motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and second by Mrs. Fry to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Heide,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of resolution number 57, 2021.
Thank you. And Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to adopt resolution number 57, 2021.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Coburn, second by Mrs. Fry, to adopt resolution number 57, 2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Heide,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
and Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Resolution number 58, 2021, presented by Mrs. Coburn. Title, OPWC Grant Application, Wolf Creek Dam Rehabilitation Project. A resolution authorizing the mayor to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Ohio Public Works Commission State Capital Improvement and/or local transportation improvement programs, and to execute contracts as required, and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to suspend.
Motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and second by Mrs. Fry to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mr. Heide,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of resolution number 58, 2021.
Thank you. Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to adopt resolution number 58-2021.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Coburn and second by Mrs. Fry to adopt resolution number 58, 2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. Angela,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Ordinance number 59, 2021, presented by Mrs. Coburn. Title, enter in cooperative agreement, City of Norton and the City of Barberton. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into joint applications between the City of Norton and the City of Barberton to apply for the Ohio Public Works Commission's State Capital Improvement Program and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to suspend.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Coburn, a second by Mrs. Fry to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angeloff.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
And Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of ordinance number 59, 2021.
And Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I second Mrs. Coburn's motion to adopt ordinance number 59-2021.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Coburn, second by Mrs. Fry to adopt ordinance number 59, 2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Ordinance number 60-2021, presented by Mrs. Coburn. Title, enter into cooperative agreement, County of Summit and City of Barberton. An ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into joint applications between the County of Summit and the City of Barberton for the Ohio Public Works Commission's OPWC State Capital Improvement Program and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mrs. Coburn's motion to suspend.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Coburn, second by Mrs. Fry to suspend the rule as required by section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Coburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that for the adoption of ordinance number 60, 2021.
Thank you. And Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Coburn's motion to adopt ordinance number 60-2021.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Coburn, a second by Mrs. Fry to adopt ordinance number 60, 2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. DeBevitt,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Angela,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Before I read ordinances 61-2021 and 62-2021, these ordinances were voted on in the City Properties and Parks and Recreation Committee meeting and added to the agenda this evening. They invoked Council Rule 702 to suspend Rules 302, the 10-day rule, Rule 304, the not on the agenda rule, and the Rule 401, not called for in the Committee of the Whole rule. Ordinance 61-2021 presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, Submission of a Grant Application, Parks, Ohio Department of Natural Resources. An ordinance approving the submission of a grant application by the Director of Parks and Recreation to the Ohio Department of Natural Resources for up to $150,000 for the construction of sand volleyball courts at Tuscarora Park and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to second Mr. Heidick's suspension.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Heidick and second by Mr. Jaber to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks?
Mr. President?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Due to the timelines and the deadlines being the beginning of June, I feel that suspension be warranted.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Councilor Fry has her hand up, Mr. President.
Okay, Mrs. Fry.
All I wanted to say was I appreciate that the ladies got this on the agenda for tonight and did all the hard work to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Angeloff,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that ordinance 61, 2021 be adopted.
Thank you. And Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mr. Heidick's adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Heidick and second by Mr. Jaber to adopt ordinance number 61, 2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber,
Yes.
Mr. Heidick,
Yes.
Mr. Griffin,
Yes.
Mr. Greer,
Yes.
Mrs. Fry,
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick,
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn,
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff.
Yes.
Ordinance number 62-2021 presented by Mr. Heidick. Title, Foundation Grant Request, Parks and Recreation Department Programs. An ordinance approving the submission of a grant application by the Director of Parks and Recreation to the Barberton Community Foundation in the amount of $15,000 to be used for the 2021 Parks and Recreation Department programs and declaring an emergency.
Motion to suspend, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
Thank you. And Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll just second Mr. Heide.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mr. Heidick and second by Mr. Jaber to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks?
Mr. President?
Go for it.
Thank you. Just as the ordinance before, the deadlines and timeliness being the beginning of June, I believe suspension to be warranted.
Thank you. Anyone else? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of Ordinance 62-2021.
And Mr. Jaber.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll just second Mr. Heidick's adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mr. Heidick and second by Mr. Jaber to adopt ordinance number 62-2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Angeloff.
Yes.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Okay. This ends the first readings.
Second reading of ordinances and resolutions.
Ordinance number 43-2021, presented by Mr. Griffin. Title: Fiscal Year 2021 CDBG Annual Action Plan. An ordinance approving the fiscal year 2021 Community Development Block Grant Annual Action Plan budget and declaring it an emergency. Resolution 45-2021, presented by Mrs. Fry. Title: ProAct Support. A resolution of the Council of the City of Barberton in support of the Protecting the Right to Organize ProAct, which provides a generational opportunity for the labor movement and serves as the cornerstone of all AFL-CIO's workers' first agenda.
Motion to suspend, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter be suspended.
And Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on suspension.
Thank you. A motion was made by Mrs. Fry, second by Mrs. DeBevick to suspend the rule as required by Section 5.10 of the Barberton City Charter. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on suspension.
Mrs. Fry.
Yes.
Mr. Greer.
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn.
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick.
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff.
Yes.
Mr. Griffin.
Yes.
Mr. Heidick.
Yes.
Mr. Jaber.
Yes.
Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the adoption of resolution number 45-2021.
Thank you, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry and second by Mrs. DeBevick to adopt resolution number 45-2021. Are there any remarks?
Mr. President?
Yep.
Councilor Gray, you can go for it there.
Yep. I will not be endorsing HR 842 as it's written currently in Congress.
Anyone else?
Yes, Mr. President.
Go for it.
Thank you, Mr. President. Investing in people is what built this country. Protecting those people moving forward, it's what's going to help this country move forward. Thank you.
Anyone else? Motion to adopt, Mrs. Fry.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that for the adoption of resolution number 45-2021.
Thank you, Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll second Mrs. Fry's motion on adoption.
Thank you. Motion was made by Mrs. Fry, second by Mrs. DeBevick to adopt resolution number 45-2021. Are there any remarks? Clerk, please call the roll on adoption.
Mr. Jaber?
Yes.
Mr. Heidick?
Yes.
Mr. Griffin?
Yes.
Mrs. Angeloff?
Yes.
Mrs. DeBevick?
Yes.
Mrs. Coburn?
Yes.
Mr. Greer?
No.
Mrs. Fry?
Yes.
This ends the second readings.
Third reading of ordinances and resolutions.
We have none at this time.
Appointments.
We have none.
Miscellaneous and unfinished business. Communications from the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let's start with COVID. And first, for council, I've been meeting with Councilman Medges quite a bit on getting back into council chambers. As you know, June 2nd is the time frame for state restrictions and mandates to be rescinded. So we're looking at this and making sure that IT is set up. So, and President Medges, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe we're looking at having council go back to city council chambers. If council members don't feel comfortable, they can still remote in virtually and attend.
That's correct.
And others can attend. Still want to be cognizant of social distancing, so we may limit the number of public or department heads that attend, because where council chambers are, on our side, outside the gallery, we're all kind of squished in there, department heads, council members, and administration. So a lot of us can just stay in our current office and attend. And I say that we're still deciding on that because Summit County is still coded red, and locally here at the county and statewide, we're still in a state of emergency. So I have a few calls this week, so we'll see if any of that changes. But I checked just before council, and we are still coded red. No change on the state of emergency. So it's one of these things where the restrictions are being lifted. That's great, but the numbers are coming down, but we're still in this weird shift of being coded red and still in a state of emergency. So we want to be cognizant of that and not only follow the state rules, but make sure that we're keeping everyone safe and secure here. So what they've always told us is we can be more strict than the county or the state. We just can't be less restrictive. So definitely more information over the next 2 weeks. There was a vaccination clinic that was put together at the last minute through SUMA and on the West Hopkinton Orange Lot over by the YMCA last week. And so we're working with them to see if we can get another one scheduled. So hopefully more information soon, and hopefully they give us more notice than before. So on the American Rescue Plan, continuing to generate ideas and working through the various webinars. As Councilwoman DeBevick stated, these webinars can contradict each other, but it's important that we attend them. Every Thursday, I have a White House call that we have to get on because at some point they may drop a bit of information that isn't released into some other webinar. So, but it is difficult because there are some contradictions, and we found that as they define various uses, specific wording has changed, and that specific wording that's changed can make all the difference in how the money is used. For example, as Finance Director Mr. Flaker said, the safety forces wages, how that was applied and the words used during the CARES Act funding versus now is totally changed. So defining that is what we're looking at. So when that final guidance comes down, we'll have obviously more better idea of how to use the money and be able to move forward with projects and programs. Appreciate council passing the legislation to enter into contract for the paving program. This is something that we work year round with, and it's a very fluid list of streets as different water main breaks happen or new construction on that street or what have you. But it's also very exciting once you see those streets getting resurfaced. Seeing the new curb put on 5th Street, knowing that there's about 12 new storm inlets on 5th Street and some of the side roads, and then knowing that the gas line has been replaced. There's been a ton of investment, probably well over $1 million by various agencies on 5th Street Northeast. So I'm very excited about a lot of these programs and projects, and that's one that we've been waiting for a few years to get to come to fruition. So that should be wrapping up. Also, the AMATS projects, we applied for and was awarded the money several years ago. So it's great to see that start to come to fruition. So very excited about that. On the seasonals, as that comes up for a vote, if you have any questions, council, please reach out. We're trying to attract more seasonals, which is important to our growing amount of duties. And this also serves as a good test for potential candidates that could be full-time employees with the city. We've hired a number of seasonals over the years. Councilwoman Angela actually used to give me my application every summer when I'd come to work for the city in the street department. So, and we've negotiated more seasonal hours, so we want to make sure that we're utilizing those each year. This past weekend, the Jeep Davis race was a great turnout, especially with all the other events going on throughout the community, whether it was youth sports or the high school graduation. So I know that the organizers just want to continue to build that, and I think that they'll have no problem doing that. I've been talking to Mr. Allen about that, for a number of years, and Mr. Bittinger and Mr. So looking for good things there. And then just lastly, next Monday's Memorial Day. City building will be closed, but they're going to have the VFW and the city will have a Memorial Day service at the Military Honor Roll at Lake Anna starting at 10 a.m. So that's all I have, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. Anything else from the good of the body?
Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. Griffin.
The Barberton Labor Day Festival. Can I make that announcement?
Why not?
We're having this year Barbecue and Music Festival September 4, 5, and 6. So, and it's on, you can check it out on www.barbertonlaborday.com. And you can also contact Mrs. Paula Callio here in Barberton. I think everyone knows her contact. And we're looking for sponsors. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, I have a couple things. Our next meeting is in 2 weeks. We have no meeting next week because it is the 5th, actually Tuesday. Monday is a Memorial Day. So it'll be on June 7th. You know, a lot can happen in 2 weeks. Summit County is in code red, which is a state of emergency. We're winging this whole thing about coming back on the 7th. I know we all want to come back. We're going to play it safe. I believe when we come back for the first month, we will be wearing masks, just to really play it safe. You can't be too safe and stuff like this. And we're going to limit the number of guests. We're going to sit down and figure out. We want to figure out how many people are coming. Council people, I will call you all within the next week. And I will also get a hold of the department heads and see if they're going to be in person or virtual. So a lot is up in the air, and hopefully it'll all work out for us on June 7th. And with anybody else, just in case? With nothing else, do I hear a motion to adjourn? Mrs. DeBevick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Thank you. And Mr. Heidick.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will second that motion on adjournment.
Thank you. It's moved by Mrs. DeBevick, second by Mr. Heidick, that we adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? This meeting is adjourned at 8:13. Have a lovely 2 weeks, and hopefully we'll be back at council chambers.
Awesome. Hey, baby, safe travels, man.
Thank you. Good evening to everyone.
Night.
Carol, you're muted. Yeah. I'm going to check with Keith Fitton and find out why you guys can't get through on my phone after 4:30.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you.
I heard you say that, so while you guys were talking, I called myself, and I can't call myself, and the phone's right there.
Yeah.
So I'm going to find out why it shuts me down. I have no.
Okay.
Thank you for mentioning it.
Okay. It's just to give you a hard time. You've had such a rough start here. But I just read something about how you learn things, and the way you learn it the most effectively is the hard way.
You know what? It has been my life.
Yeah, I know. I hear you. But you're doing a great job, and thanks for getting that all together today.
Thank you. You guys are great.